Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. Well, as 2025 draws to a close, India celebrates a landmark year. There have been quite a few number of economic reforms which have been announced, from simplified GST slabs and a very important labour code which is being implemented. There have been sweeping tax reforms as well. There have been other aspects of our energy policy, for example, nuclear energy liberalisation, that could be a game changer in the future. Now, these changes have fueled robust growth. It has empowered workers, but are the numbers adequate? It seems to have boosted ease of doing business. Are we well on our way towards a developed India? That's what the ultimate goal is, a Viksit Bharat. But while many reforms have indeed been enacted, their full impact on inclusive growth and long-term sustainability remains to be seen amidst ongoing global challenges. So what we thought we'd do, along with a panel of India's finest economists, to look at various aspects of our economy and get their expert comments. First, the overall economic growth numbers. And let's bring up the first set of numbers here. The overall economic growth story is where India has achieved a remarkable 8.2% GDP growth in 2025. That's good news. We've surpassed global estimates and driven comprehensive structural reforms across multiple sectors. Now, these reforms shed outdated laws, simplified regulations. They align governance with national ambitions for prosperity and global competitiveness. So this is the good news in terms of policies and what has been done. As a result of some of these moves, the impact has boosted rural areas, industry, labour markets, and also emerging sectors, laying the foundation for a Viksit Bharat by 2047. Is that actually going to happen? Do we have that ability in terms of sustained growth or not? We're going to try and find out. But I'd right up off the top like to bring up my guests and introduce them. Surjit Bhalla, Professor Arun Kumar, Gurcharan Das, Shankar Iyer, and Mitali Nikore. Let me come across to Mitali first. You know, your thoughts on the broader India story. Now, we've seen a year of multiple reforms being carried out. We talk very often about GDP growth. Let's start with that in terms of the GDP growth that we have seen, and given what we require to get to that 2047 goal, are we on the right track?
First of all, Vishnu, thank you for having me with such an illustrious panel. I think I've grown up reading a lot of their papers. So, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be with this panel. What I'd like to say is that, when we look at the India growth story, there have been 2 or 3 roadblocks that India has really overcome in 2025. The first one, of course, has been the onslaught of tariffs that were imposed in April, and then there was a back and forth, and there's still been a 50% tariff that is still prevailing on India. And despite this, our net exports have grown, our services exports have grown, and Indian industry has found different ways and different markets over the year. And we've also had free trade agreements with New Zealand, which was recently announced. The second,
We'll talk about all of these, in a great deal of detail, and I've got a lot of graphics to bring up. But Surjit Bhalla, your opening comments on the bigger story, right? And we'll get down to specifics. Are we headed in the right direction if we talk about that goal of 2047 to become a developed nation? Because there are many, for example, Raghuram Rajan, who pointed out that for us to be able to sustain growth at the level that is required means that we would need to do a lot more in terms of GDP and GDP alone, besides other factors. So how do you look at what we are achieving in the interim?
We have done, we've done very well in terms of facilitating and investments. Let me backtrack. Look, our record, as you've pointed out, at 6.5%, which is our 35-year average, and we are now growing at something like 7.5%, 8%. So first of all, I do not question the data. I think the data are very sound. The GDP data are sound. I think in terms of the reforms, the tax reforms that have come about, I have been in full support of them, and they were long overdue. So tax reforms, very good. What is the labor reforms, labor codes, etc., all point to that we have a reasonable chance of getting to Viksit Bharat. Now, the negatives. And there are two very strong negatives. And therefore, if these negatives are not countered, we will not get to Viksit Bharat. And the two negatives are, one, foreign direct investment, which has really fallen to a record low, back to the level it was there in 1990. So that's our first problem. And second, the trade deal. If we do not achieve a substantial trade deal with the US,
Yep.
I think our chances of Viksit Bharat, which have been outlined, we know what the growth rate required is, not a chance.
All right.
So I think we need FDI and we need the trade deal.
Okay, good.
Both of them-
So hang on a second. I just want to keep the strike rotating. Before I do that, you'd mentioned, Mr. Bhalla, labor reform. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, we've got a few points. Let's bring those up. The 4 labor codes which have been consolidated, which have now happened, consolidate 29 old laws into a modern framework. They enhance worker security, fair wages, and also workplace safety. So that's absolutely critical. Implementation is supporting a 64+ crore workforce. It's promoted female participation. It's maintained low unemployment amidst economic expansion. And the reforms are focused on smoother industrial relations and wider social security, positioning labor as a center to India's growth story. So, Gurcharan Das, in terms of labor reform and what we are talking about, dispelling insecurity, promoting the participation of women, how important has labor reform, as part of the overall goal?
Well, I think as far as labor reforms is concerned, it's very clear that we have reduced from 29 laws to 4 codes. We've simplified it, and whatever you've just mentioned, I think these are all good things. But in the case of labor, we have a long way to go to become competitive to the world, to our own competitors. So we have still a long way to go. But let me give you the best news of all, which nobody has mentioned so far. And that is, apart from the GDP numbers, apart the good things that Surjit also mentioned, the fact is that India is today still the most over-regulated economy in the world. And the good news is that the government has realized it, and they have created 3 high-level committees under the cabinet secretary, 2 cabinet secretaries, Gauba, who was formerly cabinet secretary, Rajiv Gauba, and the other one is the early fruit of their work is the fact, which no one has so far mentioned, which is perhaps getting rid or reducing the most discredited and the most expansive of the non-tariff barriers that we ever can set up. And that was these quality control orders.
Sure.
It was really ridiculous, and just it did so much damage you cannot imagine. And I can see these guys. But let me just put this in context. It's very important to understand why India still is one of the most hostile places to work. And why? Because thanks to the good work done by the Team Lee's people, the RegTech group, that they have said that an Indian company has to comply with 1,536 acts, 6,618 filings, fulfilling 69,233 compliances. And just think of a small guy, a small pharmaceutical company, MSME. It spends on the average 13 to 17 lakhs a year to comply with 988 unique obligations. Of these, 486 carry a jail sentence.
Right.
You believe the atmosphere of fear?
No, I take what you're saying, but
and so to me, the best news, Shom, is the news that we have finally understood it. We have got good people up there who really are out to hopefully dismantle. Because, all the reforming countries, say Margaret Thatcher in the UK or Deng Xiaoping in China, Deng Xiaoping changed the incentive system of the bureaucracy from no to a system whereby a bureaucrat was judged on how much investment he got for his area.
Okay.
How many jobs he created.
All right, sir, hold on a second. Let me bring in my other panelists as well. We've got plenty to discuss. Just on this point, Professor Arun Kumar, in as much as we talk about simplifying laws and regulations, particularly when it comes to labor, there's another important part of this, which is wider social security. In the context of what has been missing in the past, social security in so many regards, is the worker more protected in any form than they were until these laws came into play?
So, Vishnu, thank you for having me. There are two Indias. We have the organized sector and the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector is completely unregulated as far as I can tell. There are, 6.5 crore micro units, which are so small that there's no regulation. There's an average employment of 1.7 there. There are 500,000 small and medium units. Medium units are regulated, but the small are not. So which India are we talking about? Agriculture has, maybe 8 to 11 crore farmers. Large number of them, 85% are below 5 acres of land. They need different kind of help. So if we are talking about the organized sector is one thing, but if we are talking about India, we have to talk about what do we do for the unorganized sector. And that is where the problem lies. If you look at the economy, it's a problem of demand. Capacity utilization is hovering around 75% according to RBI, and that data pertains to the organized sector. What's happening in the unorganized sector, we hardly know. So my argument is that now IMF has also put a question mark on our GDP data by saying that we don't measure the informal sector currently. It's a point that I've been making since demonetization, that we are proxying the unorganized sector with the organized sector. So our growth rate, if it was 8.2%, there'd be plenty of employment generation. But there is, all the news from the ground that employment generation is rather poor. And unemployment is pretty high. And in India, we don't see straight unemployment. We see a large amount of underemployment. We see a lot of disguised unemployment, which doesn't get counted in the unemployment data. So I think we have a long way to go to actually achieve a Viksit Bharat, where we become, a developed economy, given that we are roughly around 140th in terms of per capita income globally. We have a long way, and even if, say, the well-off segment, the organized sector does well, doesn't mean the unorganized sector is doing well. So we have to take everybody along. And the low per capita income that we have is because of the unorganized sector, where the income levels are very low. In the e-Shram portal, about which the Prime Minister mentioned, there are 300 million people registered. And to begin with, the data was that 90% of them earn less than 10,000 rupees per month. Now that brings them at close to poverty line. The last agriculture income survey that was done 2017-18 showed that from agriculture, an average farmer is getting only 27 rupees per person per day. That's also close to the poverty line. So while there is a one segment of the economy that's maybe doing well, which is reflected in the stock market, but there is another segment which is not doing so well, and we need to carry them along if we are to become a Viksit Bharat.
Shankar Iyer, would you like to respond to that? Do you agree with what he says?
Well, a lot of the reforms that you spoke about and listed out are yet to play out. So we have planted seeds and the fruits may come. For instance, labor reforms. We'll see what happens next year. But
the point on the unorganized sector, Mr. Iyer, which Arun Kumar makes so passionately, that, when we are talking about India, we appear to be talking sometimes about two Indias. The one India which is doing monumentally well, right? And the other India which remains unorganized. That when we talk about social sector reform, or labor reform, or job security, or conditions in the workplace, or an income which actually matters and contributes, that we are falling short at one level, possibly because we don't even have numbers which we actually require to fix the problem.
Now we'll have to speak about how the clock works. So basically, we don't measure what needs to be measured. We don't measure what we measure is not measured adequately. And the maxim in economics is that what you can improve that which is measured. If 46% of the labor force is in agriculture, there is no mystery to why your per capita income is down. And 46% of the labor force is dependent on 1/6 of the national income. As far as the organized and unorganized sector debate goes, this has been the state of affairs since 1950 or 55. We industrialized through the state, and entrepreneurship has been hassled. If we want to set up a solar power plant in India, it takes 115 permits. 115. This is parliament data. I'm not sort of saying it. No entrepreneur has told me this. So when you look at these things, then you know that there is much more to be done. Surjit mentioned the point about FDI. It's the lowest. It's also a mystery to me as to why the rupee has been hammered. If we are growing at 8%, if we are the fourth largest economy, and if our inflation is so low, if our fiscal balances are right. So there is a paradox of the K-shaped economy playing out here. What I want to place on record, that steps are being taken. There are some intelligent moves. So the Prime Minister's sort of aligned domestic politics and geopolitics. The income tax cuts and the GST came before the Delhi and Bihar elections.
Yep.
The free trade agreements are to address the Trump policies. We need to do much more.
Okay, hang on a second. Again, you mentioned GST, and I'm not meaning to be rude with any of you. I'm not really a rude person per se. But I'm trying to structure this, and I want to prevent you people from talking about things which I'm going to talk about before you talk about. Because you know more about these than I do. So one of them is GST reforms. So GST shifted to a simplified two-slab structure, 5% and 18%. It eases the burden on households, on medium and small scale industry, on farmers and labor-intensive sectors. This reduced disputes. It did boost compliance and improve digital oversight while maintaining fiscal balance for sin goods, for example, tobacco. So there was a big boost in compliance. There's been a record sale during the festivals as a result of the GST reforms, and projected revenue growth clearly demonstrated a people-friendly, growth-oriented tax regime. In fact, this, to the common person, was one of the big highlights of the year. GST reform, the fact that it's simpler now, Mitali, the fact that the average consumer, particularly in the middle class, had more rupees in their wallet to spend, as a means of spurring growth. How important was it? And spurring growth becoming particularly significant given the pressure that we face from the United States in terms of sanctions. So did it balance
Absolutely.
out? And as a step, how would you look at it?
No, absolutely. At that time, Vishnu, it was one of the most important steps that could have been taken, because if we look at the overall consumption boost that happened in Q2, Q3, and is also following on a little bit in the Q4 consumer sentiment, it actually comes from that entire GST Bachat Utsav. The timing of the announcement, the fact that it was timed with Diwali, all of that worked very, very well. However, having said that, it is critical to note that there are still
30
certain
minutes for the entire
fundamental
show.
issues with the GST, where we have to look at how it is being implemented, the different rates that are still prevailing. Are they actually the best rates for certain businesses to attract investment in the longer term? But in the short term, for that 1 quarter or 2 quarters, it was critical to maintain that consumer sentiment.
Okay. Surjit Bhalla, GST reform, the significance of that. And if I could just ask you a forward-looking question, if we were to work through GST further, what would you like to see?
Well, apart from alcohol and oil being in GST, I think it has been a substantial improvement over what we have. It is itself in a very good shape. As you saw, there were most of the commentators, however, got it wrong when they said that the GST will lead to a significant increase in consumption. And I argued along with Rajesh Shukla that this is erroneous. What the GST reform will do is lower lower consumption, ceteris paribus, because some of the savings that you get from a decline in GST will go into investment. So I thought it was a fantastically good policy. That doesn't mean there isn't further to go. You should not be looking at how much extra consumption you get out of it. You should also be looking at how much extra investment you get out of the savings. I have no problems with the GST. One other point, though I think it should be addressed, one comment was that the informal sector is not being covered and we don't know much about it. I think perhaps you need a separate session on that.
Sure.
You know a lot about the informal sector. You know everything that the agricultural sector is producing, at what rate they are producing, what crops they're producing, what values they're getting for their output. And again, with the PLFS, you have what is the situation of employment for the unorganized sector, for the organized sector. And indeed, one strong result coming out from the PLFS is that those in the organized sector, let's call them the salaried workers, have shown a lower increase in real wages than those in the unorganized sector, let's call them the casual workers. So I think we just need to get our facts right, and then we can proceed with the analysis.
Let's talk about income tax reforms, and let's bring up the next set of points now. So income tax reforms, there is no tax on incomes now up to 12 lakh rupees. That's provided significant relief for the middle class. It's enabled better financial planning and spending. So huge relief for the middle class. The new Income Tax Act 2025 replaces the complex 1961 Act. It rationalizes exemptions. It reduces litigation. That is so important. Our courts are chock-a-block full as it is. And in terms of tax cases, if there is any relief from more tax cases, then it certainly unburdens the legal system, which is so important. It's promoted voluntary compliance through clarity and technology-driven administration. It breaks from colonial era complexities. Gurcharan Das, the simplicity or the added simplicity in the system over what it was earlier on in terms of taxes and income tax. Do you believe the addition of new technology, easier monitoring, the easier ability to actually pay income tax makes this a win-win?
Well, I think this is a very positive move. But the bigger one happened, which you didn't mention, happened a few years ago, which was basically meant what they call the faceless assessment.
Yes,
which again,
yes,
that
true, very true, yeah.
Now, for the since then, I don't know, 5-7 years ago, it happened, I have not had to see the face of an income tax officer, to my delight. And neither has my CA. And so there's something good happening there. I hope GST and the other tax regime people will also move in this direction, because at the bane of our country is corruption still. And this sort of thing reduces the face-to-face, reduces the opportunities for corruption.
Sure.
So yes, let's do it. We've got there are a lot of things. I mean, I think she mentioned the fact that we still have in the GST, while it's terrific, now we are basically 2 slabs. That's good, but the implementation, again, what I talked about, the need for deregulation, process reform. Process reform is the bane of our country. So the way that the officers still treat the small guy,
that has to be fixed.
Yeah, so if they could just move GST in that direction,
sure,
we'd all be...
So Professor Arun Kumar, I know you have a point to make, but my question to you also is this. India needs to expand our tax base. One of the key points in tax reform is to ensure that more people pay. Implementing this has been an absolute nightmare. Are we anywhere closer to something better than what we've been achieving in terms of recovering income tax?
So, in the income tax, basically about 9 crore individuals filed return, which is much larger than what it was earlier. But out of that, about my estimate is about 6.5 to 7 crore file either negligible return or nil return. So they're really out of the tax net. So what you have is only about 2.5 crore people who are effectively filing returns. So it's a very small number compared to almost 150 crore Indians. And that's why the Prime Minister flagged this issue also. At that time, he said 1.1 crore Indians are actually filing substantial returns. So they are effective taxpayers. Now, the point I would make is that any income tax reform that we do affects a tiny percentage of our population. Similarly, GST actually applies to the organized sector. It's the organized sector which pays GST. The unorganized sector is out of the GST net. So if you have a turnover of up to 1.5 crore, you are in the composition scheme. If you are below 50 lakh, you are exempted completely. As a result, you don't get input credit. So therefore, the price of the unorganized sector goods doesn't come down, but the price of the organized sector comes down. So demand shifts from the unorganized to the organized sector. Now, the unorganized sector is what produces a large part of the consumption goods. And if that happens, then actually your overall demand may actually fall. Because this reform, the GST reform and income tax reform are about the organized sector and not about the unorganized sector. So therefore, we have to be very careful again. We have to differentiate between what's happening to the unorganized sector and what's happening to the organized sector. And regarding the employment also, I would say that actually, if you look at the data, large number of people have left the labor force. That's why the, percentage of population that is in the labor force is very small compared to other large economies like China and the US and so on. And therefore, we have to bring more people, especially women and educated youth, back into the workforce. If we don't do that, then we have a huge problem because youth is now getting desperate. The Gen Z revolutions that have taken place elsewhere may or may not happen here, but you can see that, they are either depressed, they are on the mobile phone, and a lot of them have gone into drugs and drinking. So there's a lot of social problem associated with the kind of unemployment that we have of the educated youth, and especially in the age group of 15 to 29, that, unemployment is large. And for women, the labor force participation rate is low. For men, it's quite good, but for women, it's low. So we have to get a lot of women back into the workforce. And for that, we have to generate more jobs. And where do we generate jobs? Not in the organized sector that's highly mechanized and automated. We will be able to generate jobs only in the unorganized sector if we have to generate more work.
Okay, I'm going to go through two sets of graphics here and then come to Shankar next. Maritime and port reforms. We talk about a maritime economy, a blue water economy. Hence, this is important. 5 new maritime bills, modernized laws from colonial times. It's eased documentation, reduced the cost of logistics. Remember, logistics drive trade. Absolutely critical as far as the overall, the macro story of the Indian economy is concerned. Reforms have been encouraged for coastal shipping, improved safety, empowered state maritime boards for a 21st century framework. This has positioned India to expand our blue economy and align with global standards. So this is critical, but I'd also like you to talk about the ease of doing business and MSME support, where there's been sweeping deregulation moves, quality control orders for many products, and expanded small company definitions up to a turnover of 100 crore. There are revised MSME thresholds as well, which have been raised 2 to 2.5%. This has allowed enterprises to scale incentives, scale without losing benefits and incentives. And these changes have unshackled entrepreneurs, especially MSMEs and exporters. It's fostered perhaps confidence and global competitiveness. So all of these critical. So Shankar Iyer, let's talk about the MSME sector, as it were, and revised MSME thresholds, 2 to 2.5 times, which have allowed enterprises to scale up without losing benefits. It's a huge part of our economy. The moves which have been done now, how would you assess them? What would you like to see in terms of future moves?
Well, 2 words: necessary but not sufficient.
I see.
So the MSME reforms, whatever has been done is good. There is always in India policy on paper and policy in practice. So one good thing about what the Reserve Bank has done is to enable MSMEs to get their share of, after the pandemic, new systems were created so that they were not hurt due to whatever disruptions followed. The point that I want to make about MSMEs is that they do not get funding for R&D and they do not get funding access to credit. If you see, even Parliament records show that nearly a third or even more of MSMEs do not get access to credit. The government of India had two very interesting policies in the last budgets. One was R&D fund of 1 lakh crore, 20,000 crores for this year. I don't think even a single rupee has been dispersed because they're struggling with how to systemize that or what kind of process to follow.
Right.
The second is a MSME credit card, Udyam credit card was launched in this budget for micro entrepreneurs. We don't have the data. Again, the problem with India's reforms program is that once a policy is changed or announced, you don't follow up with measurements. Is that working? Whether it is not working. 2 points I wanted to make about GST and income tax. So, Vishnu,
Go ahead.
Most people who have come across the GST cuts, the healthcare, those who are buying healthcare will have a different story on whether things have moved because healthcare costs have not come down because of cut of GST. A large number of people are complaining about that. The second about, I won't be as sanguine about the income tax reforms. There's a much to be done. The number of cases that are pending, the amount of, roughly about 5 lakh crores are pending in tribunals and courts. These are things that need to be addressed. And it's not just about the capacity of courts, it is about the pile-up of cases. I'm not very sanguine about the faceless system. We underestimate the ability of chartered accountants to game the system.
Right. Okay, what I'd like to do at this stage is to take a short break, after which we'll come back with FDI and trade reforms, assess what the government has done. Is it enough? We're going to take a short break, come back with more. Welcome back. We've been looking at the state of the Indian economy, all of the reform measures which have been carried out. Let's turn our attention to foreign direct investment and trade reforms. Let's bring that graphic up. Well, first up, 100% FDI has been allowed in insurance, attracted capital, enhanced competition. It's improved services in the growing market. So the liberalisation of insurance is important. There have been multiple free trade agreements. The UK, Oman, New Zealand, expanded duty-free access there with investment commitments, export promotion schemes, a new securities market code which has unified laws, it strengthened governance and consumer protection. Let me go back to Mitali, and in as much as we are celebrating, and we should, free trade agreements with the United Kingdom, with Oman, with New Zealand, it's obvious that the big one has still not happened, the United States. How critical is that for, let's say, our GDP growth? Because as I understand it, there would likely be an almost immediate revision. If we were to get those sanctions that, down substantially post an agreement with the United States. So without that happening, is it a case of a glass, half empty at this stage?
So I think, Vishnu, as I was saying right in the beginning, our country has actually seen a lot of difficulties when it comes to trade policy this year. And I would definitely say that we've done a very good job in navigating and circumventing these situations which we did not create. I mean, when it comes to looking at alternative markets, a lot of industries, houses that I've been working with, they found alternative markets for their products. They found a diversified market base internationally for many, many commodities, gems and jewelry, textiles. I mean, these are sectors that were in a real crisis in August, when the tariffs actually came into effect and when the tariffs went up to 50% for India. The fact that we were able to find these markets is in itself a big win.
Right.
Now, today we have good agreements with the UK, with the EU is also in negotiation, Australia is in negotiation, New Zealand has almost come through. They have to vote for it in their parliament, Oman as well, and other East Asian countries as well as Asian countries are being negotiated. But the real question for India is not just about the US trade agreement, it's about how do we bring the world back as a leader to a rules based trading system, because what the US has essentially done is come and said, I am not going to play by the rules that were set in the World Trade Organization. And I think this is where India has a huge role to play along with other countries, along with the BRICS. And as it takes the leadership of the BRICS in 2026, this becomes even more incumbent upon India to do. And I think we are in a good position to do it. Of course, if we are able to secure the trade agreement with the US, it will add a lot of relief to some of the people in specific industries like gems and jewelry, textiles and leather goods and footwear and carpets. But at a macroeconomic level, our economy has shown that we are truly resilient to these onslaughts that came our way.
Surjit Bhalla, at the end of the day, and this is a cynical way of looking at it, I admit, is that America appears to have won this battle. When it comes to, for example, India's continued import of Russian oil, because they've gone and sanctioned Russia and Russian oil firms, it's meant that continued import of Russian oil is no longer viable for our oil importers. So their ultimate goal of cutting down on Indian oil imports has willy-nilly been achieved. Of course, we've got alternate oil sources. But in terms of bullying us in a way that suits Donald Trump's interests, is it not true that the American playbook seems to be working quite well?
I'm the odd person out when it comes to trade and US. I think Trump has tried to do us a favor by imposing all these restrictions. So we open up.
Yeah.
We haven't opened up. So that is the ultimate goal. And, I sort of not resent, but I think every time anybody, any of the panelists here, you, etc., comes out and blames the US by not playing by the rules. That's absolutely correct. Please enlighten me. How much of the rules has China played by?
Oh, they haven't. But they aren't being sanctioned for their oil imports. That's why America is being entirely biased.
No. Either you answer my question about China playing by the rules. China today has a far greater share of world manufacturing. So either they are supermen and superwomen, or they have manipulated the trade system. They have, for example, at the end of Second World War and even as late as 1960, US manufacturing was a fraction of the world trade that China's manufacturing is today. So how did they get there?
All right.
There is a complete state-backed system. They don't play by the market rules. The state is there to save them.
Okay.
And along with the US, though not so much market rules today as it was yesterday, but the entire world system plays by a certain set of rules, which is why now you look at US, and US has started investing in firms, which is something completely unheard of.
Okay, fair enough.
The US government has invested in firms.
Right.
So I think, look, let's be clear. I'll just finish with the following. Please show me how, without a trade deal with the US, our manufacturing and our trade can accelerate. One last point. With New Zealand, we have a trade deal, and we'll double in 5 years from 0.8 billion to 1.6 billion. What are we talking about? So the major story for world trade, for India's trade, for India's growth is US. If the US is there, the European Union will be there, Japan will be there, etc. So forget about, we did so well, etc. No chance. Show me the data.
Okay, got it. Gurcharan Das, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I agree with Surjit's key point, which is that I think that Trump has done us a favor. What he's forcing us to do is to open up. We have been one of the most protected economies in the world. The reality is that he's called us the king of tariffs. I mean, that's an insult for a country 80 years old to have you put tariffs. The argument is called the infant industry argument, and the reality is, after 80 years, we are no longer infants, and so we should have brought these tariffs down on our own, and that is good. But where I disagree with him, or where I disagree with our own people on the way we have handled it, is that we have played into his hands. In other words, he's a narcissistic person, and you please him, and he will be happy, and you won't get. Our tariffs will be between 15% and 19%, which is what they should have been. And so we have brought our national ego into play.
Okay.
Unfortunately, against his personal
ego.
Right. So I think we have not played our game well, but nevertheless, let's hope. And I totally agree that New Zealand and all fine, but the US deal matters.
Okay. Professor Arun Kumar, I am being unfair to you. You have 30 seconds because I need to start wrapping this up. Go ahead.
Okay, so very crucially, what Trump has done is he's actually separated all the countries, and the countries are going as beggar thy neighbor. We've all wanted a good deal, and he therefore separated us, and therefore he's got a good deal. He's got a good deal with EU, with Japan, with Korea, with everybody. So where do we falter? We falter on technology. We don't spend enough on technology. China's spending 22 times more on R&D than we do, and that's why they become the manufacturing hub. Whatever play they've been making, whatever manipulation they've been doing, but they have actually, even the US is forced to give concession to them because of the technological lead. We have $100 billion trade deficit with them because we not only import high technology items, but low technology items like Patang and, Majha and Diwali lights and so on and so forth. How do we get out of it? That's the question. Unless we really go up on the R&D ladder, we are not going to be able to compete either with the US or with China or Russia.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think R&D is such a key part of this. All right, I need to start wrapping this up. I've got one more set of graphics. I'm just going to go through that. Decriminalization and deregulation. That's been another big factor this year. The Jan Vishwas reforms decriminalized over 200 regulatory trust has shifted. So 200 minor offenses and scrapped outdated laws. It's reduced regulatory intimidation, state level adoption, amplified this into a national movement that supported entrepreneurs. And some say that this is a cultural shift. It's built a system which is meant to support business growth. And finally, one more set of reforms as we wrap this program up. Nuclear energy reforms. The Shanti Bill, as it's called, enabled regulated private and foreign participation in civilian nuclear projects while maintaining government control over strategic assets. So it's repealed old acts. It's created a modern safety-first framework for capital and technology influx. It's aimed to accelerate next-generation reactors and support clean energy goals of India as well. So there you have it, a look at some of the key areas in terms of India 2025 and policies. We've tried to go through many. There are some others which we've not had time to go through, for example, rural and legal reforms, but it's all part of a process. And that process, of course, leads us to Viksit Bharat in 2047. As our panelists have said, there are important steps, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And perhaps we need to be realistic about where we are and where we may get. Thank you all very much for being with us. Have a wonderful new year, all of you. Thank you. Goodbye.